Okay, it is 5:30, so I think we should start our webinar. We have a lot of content to cover this evening. My name is Amy Casala. I am the Executive Director of Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail, Inc. We are a subsidiary nonprofit of Scenic Hudson, and we are pleased to welcome you to this webinar, which will cover our Breakneck Connector and Ridge. Last meeting, we had revealed to you the master plan for the entire and vision for Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail. And today we're really going to zoom in on what you can expect to see first go into construction on the ground. So let's just give a few more minutes for a few participants to join based on our registration count, and we'll get underway. Okay, it looks like we are ready to begin. So go to the next slide. And the next. And so, as I mentioned, today's presentation is really going to focus on the Hudson Highlands and what project implementation you can expect to see right around the Breakneck Ridge trailhead area. So that's the Breakneck Connector, as we've come to call that project, and a bridge that would be built in that location. But since I don't know that all of you saw our last webinar in the summer on the master plan, I wanted to just give a little bit of context for the project we'll be introducing you to this evening. At the end, we'll have some questions and answers. So please enter them in as we go along, and we'll answer them at the end. And then we also have a number of polling questions throughout, just to make this a little more interactive. We can't meet in person right now, but we certainly do want to have this be a more engaging meeting-like format. And so we have a few questions, and let's look at what that looks like. So a sample of a polling question. On the next slide. We just are curious of who we have on the line right now. So we have 103 attendees. Where is everyone attending from? The answers are Cold Spring, Phillipstown area, Beacon, Fishkill, within the 25-mile area of that, or even further beyond the 25 miles of the project site. You can see if you just click on it, it'll add it into the mix here, and we see the end results. I'll just give one more minute, see if we can get 100% participation. Okay, so let's end the polling and see what we have. So it seems that we have quite a few people curious about this project from beyond 25 miles in the project area, but that's about 36%. Most of you on the line here are really within the project area, which is great. This is in your back door, so we certainly want to make sure we're sharing this information and also hearing what your thoughts. So that's what that looks like, and there will be a few more. So let's move along. So this is just a reminder of the steering committee that's really advanced the project to this time. So Scenic Hudson has coordinated for years this coalition of 20 partners who have really for over 8 years worked together on this project. And so it's a nonprofit, New York City metro area, Metro North and DEP, 4 municipalities that this project traverses, a number of state agencies and community-based nonprofits. And I'll say, as coordinator of this, and that we've gotten to the point of having Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail Inc. and the project division that we have today is certainly attributable to the participation of all of this coalition members and the great leadership of Scenic Hudson. And so next. This is the vision we shared in the last Power webinar in the summer. So what I would encourage, if you have missed that webinar, it is available on our website, and you could go and view it at any time. And that really outlays how we have moved this project from the idea of a trail that was connecting Cold Spring and Beacon to a whole park vision for this park that traverses 7.5 miles, provides a number of destinations. It's hiking trails, multi-use path, an ADA trail, and family-friendly zones and spaces for just play or reflection. And so we're really looking at how this project has evolved to incorporate something for everyone. I think a main driver early in this project was that the visitation to Breakneck. And while that's still certainly a good variable to keep an eye on and is significant to this landscape and quality of life, what we're looking to do is spread people out and offer other things in other locations, but also serve other ages and abilities. So not everyone's going to be hiking Breakneck, though some of you may, and we'll get to that polling question in a minute. Next. And there's a number of goals in the master plan, and those are really consistent with the thinking of, I think, the locals when we had community conversations about this, and then the design team, but really wanting to make sure that in this very special landscape, whatever's put here is working with the landscape, highlighting the nature, helping to protect nature where we can, choreographing the stewardship, and really visitation and stewardship activities of the visitors to this area, and where we can, really reconnecting people with the river. So the river is visibly there right now, but there are only a few points where you can actually have a toes in the water moment. This project will be looking to open that up a bit more. Next. So there is still a trail. So from Cold Spring to Beacon, 7.5 mile main trail. And the goal there is that this is as consistent as possible so that people can sit comfortably, walk along, and then have their own side explorations on a meander trail or in one of the signature destinations. Next. And so to make it as predictable as possible, and you'll see these material palettes come out in the presentation to follow, we really want to have a predictable surface so that you can minimize the amount of signage that you have and people just know where they're supposed to be. What that also does is keep people where you want them to be by really demonstrating where the trail is, where you should be. And you can have subtle hints like the buffer rocks on the side of the image to the top right to tell people to stay on the trail and not to be wandering into the woods there. Next. So anywhere on the ground, we hope to have it be the crushed stone surface in front of you. In some spots that's not possible, and so we're looking for wood. And so later in today's presentation, you'll see a bridge, and think of this wood material palette when we're looking at that bridge image. Elevated trail sections also will have this. And so again, trying to keep a very quiet, natural palette that stays consistent throughout the park. And the third material for main trail portions, and this is true further south of the area we'll be focusing on this evening, is the concrete plank. And that's what we've delineated as 4 different landscape zones of the project. So from south to north, we have the river's edge in the Cold Spring area, the Highlands, the forest zone, and then the marsh. And today we will really focus in on the Highland zone. And that is because it is going to be the first to go to implementation. So Breakneck Connector and Ridge in the improvements in this area, we hope in about a year's time to be breaking ground and starting to implement those improvements. Next. So because it's in the Highland zone, the palette there skews a little bit towards the rock to really play up the presence of breakneck and that rocky landscape. So we really have a number of rock pieces in here, both as accents or features like a boulder scramble. Next. And so this just shows you a little bit of that in the site plan, but Scott from Scape will certainly introduce you to this in greater detail. So let's meet our panelists this evening. We have presentations from the team that will really help spell out all of the improvements that we see in this area. So working with Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail on this is about the work. They're the owner's rep and helping to guide the ship of many planning and construction design processes in play. So we have Lisa Gray from Gray Organsky Architecture. She's a principal and partner there and has been working on design elements related to the bridge and structures. And so she'll be speaking to those this evening. We have Scott Goodrich, an associate, and then also the project manager for the construction drawings developed for the Breakneck Connector. And he's with Scape Landscape Architecture. And then Christina Mealy from Fast Enough Engineers, and they are the structural engineers, so clearly working on the elevated trail and bridge. And so each of these 3 presenters will help narrate the improvements and rationale for those improvements this evening. Next. So just a little bit of context on the project site. By the star and the P towards the back of this photo, that's Breakneck. So you see the star is the trailhead for Breakneck, and that's the big ascent there. The total project area north to south here is 0.7 miles, so just under a mile. And it's a very narrow project site. So it speaks to the constricted nature of this. We're between Route 90 and a very active Metro North rail line. The other star is for the Wilkinson Trailhead, which you can ascend, or if you do the whole loop of Breakneck, you'd be descending there and getting back to your car. You see some yellow staircases here. Those are train station platforms for arrivals and departures to the Breakneck stop, which has 6 trains a day on the weekends when it is open for service. So you have the northbound platforms to the back of this photo, and the southbound platforms, just little yellow staircases at this time, more to the front here. So all of this is going to be improved in the function of it, the safety of it in this project. Next. And why are we starting in the middle? So right now, that yellow dot in the middle is one of the train stations. The other 2 train stations in the project area are Cold Spring Station and Beacon Station. Starting in the middle, because that's where the highest need is. We know this is the most congested. Concerns about safety really made this piece the driver of the sort of vision and sense of need for improvement in this area. So we wanted to make sure we addressed the highest need area first, and that will be in this particular location with the yellow dot by Breakneck. So what are we looking to do? Clearly not just a trail anymore, so how do we have this aspirational goal of transitioning this thoroughfare both cars, people, and trains into a park that has that placemaking and sense that it can serve all safely. Families, people can sit and enjoy the views and really enjoy the space and not just try to get as quickly as possible from point A to point B, as is the behavior today. And so our vision of all the ingredients we'll introduce you to this evening hopefully achieve that goal, really providing safe spaces and views and enjoyment for the visitors to this first part of a much larger park. And we see that being achieved, and this is how the rest of this presentation will be structured, by really offering these functions. So safely managing visitation, planning for sea level rise so that the improvements that are made are able to stand the test of time, restoring natural systems where we can, adding visitor amenities, and then creating special moments and places. Next. And so we'll walk through each of these and sort of describe how the project does each of these. So in safely manage visitation, a critical question is, what is the visitation? And so currently Breakneck Ridge is the driver of visitation to this specific spot of the project. And we have some data from New York, New Jersey Trail Conference stewards who count hikers, greet hikers, filter hikers, thankfully. And so they've been able to give us a sense of visitation on summer weekends only during sort of peak season. So this is not an annual count, but it does show who they counted over the years. And obviously visitation has been on the rise. And so 2 more questions related to this are, and we'll take these one at a time. Have you contributed to the visitation at Breakneck? Who on the line here has hiked Breakneck, either full or in part, and maybe how many times? Let's see how robust a hiking crew we have on the line today. Okay, and stop now. It would seem that most of you have, about 28% have never hiked, but everyone else on the line has hiked it at least once or twice. Most people only hiking it once or twice. Well, you're not alone. So our second question asks you to look at how many people you feel have visited on an annual basis nowadays. We've estimated this in the past, but obviously visitation has gone up over time. And so if you had to guess how many people are estimated to hike Breakneck each year, the choices are 10, 45, 100, or 250. Okay. So the most popular response was 57% saying 100,000 a year. And when I last calculated and estimated, that was the answer that I reached, but that was several years ago now. So the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference recently projected out based on counts that they've taken, and they think that the number is closer to 250 now. And so that has been due to a number of things, increased number of train stops to that area, continued spread and popularity of hiking overall, which we see nationally. And then also, I think just the fact that now in COVID, actually more people have been wanting to get out and enjoy and socialize outside. And so this summer, it's sort of been different reasons people come, but certainly people have continued to come this year. Okay. So now I'll hand this over to Scott Goodrich from Scape Landscape Architects, and he's going to walk us through how we are going to manage all of this visitation to keep things calm and functioning well.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so 200, 100, 200,000 people a year is a lot of visitors to bring to the Breakneck Ridge hike. And the Fjord Trail Master Plan will be its own draw. So I think, part of the way that this project was born was out of recognizing that it's currently risky. People arriving from the Metro North train are currently forced to walk alongside Route 9D. People park in a sort of disorganized and dangerous fashion on 9D. And all of these things mix together to create a situation that's unsafe and needs to be better managed through the redesign of this first portion of the Fjord Trail. So where we're starting really is making a trail that connects between the points of arrival between the Metro North stops to the destination, which in the short term is Breakneck, and get them off of the road and also clean up some of the railway edges and the roadway edges and provide for emergency designated spaces for emergency responders to make this a safer, more enjoyable landscape for everybody. So you can go next. So in addition to getting people off the road, we're also looking at slowing the road down. Route 90 is currently 55 miles per hour, and we're looking to reduce this section of it to a 40 mile per hour zone to increase pedestrian safety. This can happen really through an interrelated package of things, traffic calming measures, through a gateway signage, letting people know as they approach in a car that, hey, something's up, you're going to enter sort of a busy hiking recreation area. Reorganizing the parking that's on site, which people currently pull in head first and then sometimes back out onto 9D, which creates a lot of sort of hazardous situation, reorganizing that into parallel parking with sidewalks on the outsides. This increases the side friction. So, seeing parked cars on the side of the road does help drivers slow down as it visually narrows the laneway. Improve crosswalks so that there'll be 3 designated crosswalks that are all signaled and have flashing beacons, and have vegetated bump outs before areas where people are crossing so that cars are going through a narrower laneway with the planting on the sides to really force them to slow down before there's a direct pedestrian conflict. So you can go next. Oh, maybe back one. Sorry, I think we skipped. Yeah. So yeah, we're eliminating pull-in parking. Overall, there's going to be slightly less parking than the way that it's currently used. We're additionally looking at a potential trolley that could help bring people to the site from elsewhere to help reduce the demand on parking. And as I mentioned, formalize the crossing into 3 designated areas. So just sort of zooming in on this, some of the plans are quite long at 0.7 miles. So to see it in more detail, we are formalizing the existing surface parking lot, organizing the parallel parking, providing feeder paths on the outsides of the parallel parking to safely bring people to designated crossings that are off the road to reduce the number of points that people are crossing the highway, as well as provide a designated space for trolleys and emergency services. And the emergency services or people waiting for the trolley would also have a designated space where you can see sort of in the center of the screen on the outside of their bump out to safely unload equipment and prepare for any rescues or other EMS activities going on site. You can go next. So really looking to formalize this and formalize the gravel parking lot that's there now into an asphalt surface that can be maintained throughout the winter. Add an additional lot at the north to sort of keep the current capacity, but allow the trail to pass by safely between the parking and the rail, and also formalize the pathways that are leading people to the main trail in an accessible concrete walkway. Go next. So keeping people safe from the road is one goal, but also keeping people safe from the railroad is another. We'll be adding a continuous fence along the railroad so that visitors arriving by train, or just any visitors really, are kept out of the rail tracks, and those arriving by train are funneled into the landscape at safe designated moments while maintaining controlled access for the MNR. Making accommodations for emergency responders. So currently there's 2 designated pull-offs for emergency responders, one at the location where the existing parking lot is, and one closer to the bridge and current Breakneck trailhead. Access to the bridge would be controlled by bollard that the EMS responders can have a key to, and the entire trail is meant to be accessible by an EMS ATV if there are rescues further down the line. Next. So as Amy mentioned, consistency is a big thing. We're looking to, with the trail materials, be as consistent as possible so that the fjord trail has a recognizable identity and is easy to follow for everyone. Use materials that are naturalistic and feel like they're part of the landscape, and that are also accessible. So through the surfacing and the controlled grading of the trail, make it an amenity that could be used by everybody, young families with kids or those in wheelchairs. So altogether, all these sort of feeder paths and connection points work as a system to safely keep people out of the roadway, crossing at designated points, and filtered onto an accessible main trail. Additionally, there's infrastructure provided for casual cyclists, such as bike parking and bike repair stations. And, we're paying attention to areas where these smaller paths connect to the trail, which might have bikers or a higher volume of traffic. So widening out connection points so that there's room to safely get on and off the trail without disrupting the visual quality of it, sort of bending it around landscape, so that if you're experiencing the fjord trail, you're not necessarily distracted by all of the sort of infrastructure around you, like the parking and the multiple crossing points. A second goal of the project is to plan for sea level rise, which I think leads us to our next polling question.
Yes. So we bring that up. New York State, as hopefully most of you know, has adopted projections, and those projections vary based on where in the river, or if you're down closer to Manhattan, and how much sea level rise is expected. So in this portion of the river, what do you feel is the high projection for sea level rise? So this is by 2100, 5 inches, 25 inches, 75 inches, or 150 inches. It's a tricky one. Okay, we'll wrap it up now. So most people on the line think that 25 inches by the year 2021 is the #1 answer, closely followed by 75. So let Scott tell us what the real answer is and how it impacted our design.
So 75 inches is correct. That does impact our design because currently Breakneck is one of 2 places along the the Fjord Trail Master Plan, where it's an on-grade trail, but the current grade is below the projected 2100 high water mark. So what that means for us is that the site will take an amount of regrading to raise the trail so that the trail itself and the infrastructure around it are protected for the future sea level rise. So here's just sort of an image of that. The trail itself is graded out of the sea level, and the lower lying areas are all planned to accommodate sort of wet conditions. It's a lot of stormwater planting and gardens that can adapt to those conditions. There is a small portion of 9D, which is below the 7.8 elevation, but that can be dealt with in the future quite easily with this plan. A third goal, which goes hand in hand with the reshaping of the landscape that'll be required to raise it for sea level rise, is to restore natural systems.
And I believe this is our last polling question. But because we have a planting plan, we want to introduce and get a sense of what you think the current conditions of the landscape and vegetation are there. So invasive plants are the predominant vegetation in what proportion of the project area? Not a problem, a quarter of the project area, half, or 90 to 100%. Okay. Half the project area was the most popular response. About half of you believe that half of the project area is impacted, or has that as the predominant vegetation. But actually the answer is the 90 to 100%, which is the second most popular answer here. Almost 40% of you thought that. So well done. And a lot of invasives in this area. That's not atypical for areas along roadways and places where seeds can come in the air of passing vehicles. But we hope to positively impact that. And so Scott will introduce our planting plan.
Yeah, so it's good to see that a lot of you guessed that. It's surrounded by a much more intact natural landscape, but a lot of the Breakneck Connector is actually fill. So was previously in the river before the construction of the railroad. And with, as Amy said, with the sort of linear relationship between the railroad and the roadway, it's and the sort of the past history of not having a real caretaker, the land is pretty full of invasives. So it is our goal to correct that. And with the reshaping of the landscape and the raising of the landscape, the construction of the trail, to restore in place a much more natural landscape that fits in with the scenic quality of the surroundings. And remove some of those invasive species. So though we are looking to reshape a lot of the landscape by necessity with the raising of the trail and the construction of it, we are trying to be sensitive to significant trees and stands of vegetation that have an ecological value or that are predominantly native or are currently situated on steep slopes and shouldn't be disturbed. So the orange areas here is us working around anywhere that we can to preserve the value that is on site. And we'll be working with restoration specialists and state parks to design an implementable landscape that can be competitive with the invasive species and offer a higher ecological value once established. So it's just a range of techniques that we'll be looking at to make that happen. And the goal really is to create a diverse landscape that's full of native species, responsive to hydrology and site features, highlighting those site features and creating unique experiences along the trail. So both an ecological and a human experiential aspiration here for the reshaping of the landscape. And to protect that landscape once it's installed, in addition to the Metro North fence, which keeps people safe from the train, there will be a series of low fences at select moments wherever paths are close to one another or run parallel, to keep people out of the planting beds and respectful of the establishing nature around them. So stormwater, currently the site drains a large upland area through a series of culverts that pass under the road and then eventually through the river. But it's done in a rather utilitarian way, and it's sort of roadside ditches with steep slopes, conveying water to the river. While we're not changing the number of culverts or the overall infrastructural bones of that, we are looking to reshape it in a way that adds more collection areas to pick up water that comes off of the impervious surfaces in the trail that we've added, but to also reshape it into something that has much more stormwater garden feel with stable slopes and plants and design that expresses the site's hydrology as a positive user experience. So here's just an illustration of what that sort of looks like on a light day, on a dry day, where the regrading and the planting and a small area to step down into the stormwater garden create the opportunity to learn about the natural process that's there and to appreciate it in maybe a way that's not existing on site, and to really demonstrate after a storm. If you go next, the work that the landscape is doing. Of course, this also has a range of ecological benefits as the conditions vary from wet to dry, upland to lowland. You can support different plant communities and tuck this piece of the landscape back into the overall fjord trail, which has the goals of celebrating the regional landscape and, really being an environmental value to the community. So fourth goal is to add visitor amenities. Recognizing that a significant amount of people will be using the fjord trail, there are things that have to be done apart from just walking on it. So just to give you an overview of site furnishings, we are looking at accommodating bikes and bike repairs. The Highlands Fjord Trail will be responsible for collecting trash from designated points and keeping the area clean, and also providing wildlife crossings at the trail to mitigate any barriers for amphibians or other critters that might be otherwise in the way. So Lisa can give you an update on, or an overview of the comfort stations that are there to serve all of the visitors arriving or passing through.
Yes, thanks, Scott, and thanks, Amy. So right about the middle of the stretch of Breakneck that we're talking about today will be located a comfort station that has 12 fixtures that are using composting toilets. And we, in designing this with the team, felt that it was in keeping with the kind of naturalistic approach that Scape is leading on the design, that we were trying to avoid a really large building. And so we broke the building into 3 small buildings, which we'll see a visualization of in a second. And that sort of has the effect of just making them smaller in the landscape and hopefully a little bit friendlier. And it also has the effect of allowing a couple of the WCs to be open in the winter months, specifically the family bathrooms. So it's going to be possible to sort of shut down the main spaces and still have those two in service for people who are visiting during the winter. And we also, the other thing that I think we all are thinking about is the application of these design strategies to other places along the fjord trail. So there will be, we think, other comfort stations. They may not all need to be as large as this. So this strategy allows us to sort of take one of these little buildings as needed and place it where it might serve in another location that doesn't get as many visitors as the Breakneck area. So we could go on. So you see the strategy, it's a little cluster of gable buildings that have a kind of a nod to the general agricultural surroundings of New York State, but are still nonetheless sort of our time. And they make a little sort of courtyard where folks can wait, and Scape is providing a kind of a boulder scramble and seating on boulders. And their backs are sort of turned to 9D and to the parking lot, so that there's plenty of places for people to wait for each other, you know, when they're using these comfort stations. And the comfort stations really step back from the main trail, but are visible, if we go on to the next one, sort of visible through this constructed landscape that Scape is designing. And you can just sort of see the scale of them that are where they're, you know, don't have, hopefully, the sort of ubiquitous reading of a large bathroom building in a park. So they, you know, they're sort of broken up in this way. And if you go on, and the material palette is in alignment with the material palette and the rest of the design. And so right now we're conceiving of them as masonry buildings. So it's a masonry veneer with a sort of dry stack approach, which is also very typical and has a reference to older buildings. And those kind of harder surfaces, which don't have openings in them, would be facing the road and provide some sense of kind of protection and privacy to the space beyond. And if we go to the next one, they sort of, when we come to the inside, we have a sort of wood siding facing the place where folks will gather. And you can just see on the left one, if you look inside, that they're lined with very light wood. They're prefabricated, cross-laminated timber structures. So we're anticipating that their installation will be very straightforward on this site, which is a tight one for building. They're daylit with skylights. Of course, there's also electric light that will be used as needed. But they're pretty naturalistic little buildings, hopefully quietly doing their job there. I think we could go on. Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. So the final goal of the project is to create special moments and places along the trail. This is a goal that repeats throughout the fjord trail and manifests itself in several moments at Breakneck. So one of those, if you could go next, one of those that Lisa alluded to is the scramble bank, which is an enlarged area for people to gather or sit while they either arrive and prepare to arrive from the train and prepare to do the hike while they're passing through on the fjord trail, or while they're waiting to go home. It's the place to sort of spread out and manage the existing crowds that use the site currently, sort of huddled along the roadway, to spread them out and to, if you go next, give them a space to be safely in a way that turns its back to 9D, so you feel like you're separated from the infrastructure around you, and provides a sort of fun multi-use seating area where the raised view provides a view of the river above any fence needed to separate Metro North, and provides that sort of directional view to Storm King and the surrounding mountains in a sort of playful way that could be used for people of all ages, as the fjord trail is definitely an amenity for young families with kids looking for a more accessible recreation opportunity than Breakneck itself, but still brings in that sort of stone flavor of Breakneck that's so attractive. And then moving up, or moving south really towards Breakneck, there's a series of other moments to talk about. The next one I believe is the bridge, which Christina from Fasten Up Engineers can walk through.
Great, thanks, Scott. Yeah, so the bridge is obviously a specific moment along the trail, and we've mentioned collaboration with all the stakeholders, but this one specifically has been a close collaboration with Metro North as we're passing over their tracks. DEP, as we come close to the land on the west side of the bank, and the existing chamber building there, as well as parks and DOT. Can go on to the next slide. So the concept of the bridge and what we've really talked about as an overall team in relation to the park is this moment of a decision where you can continue on the trail and go up to hike Breakneck, or you can approach the bridge and cross over the Metro North tracks. Creating what's a connection point along the full 7-mile trail, or even just accessing this overlook, which you kind of see on the riverbank, and creates views of Storm King and the river in general. So the general plan layout of the bridge is what we've called a bow tie geometry, which opens up on either side of the bank and kind of slims down at the center of the bridge. Can move on. So the general design concept, which our team at Fasten Up has worked very closely with Greer Gansky, who's developed a lot of these aesthetic renderings of the bridge. And we've really honed in over a lot of different decision-making processes on an arch steel structure that makes the 140-foot span across the railroad tracks. So what started actually as a more bulkier arch kind of has slimmed its way down and speaks to the kind of elegance and simplicity of just a quiet bridge that crosses across the tracks. That is complemented by the really light stainless steel wire mesh railing that provides a level of safety and enclosure as you're walking across the bridge, separates from the tracks and rises up to provide a throw enclosure where it's required, and then falls back down to become more of just a safety pedestrian rail. The entire bridge is made up of a weathered steel arch, which is this underslung bottom structure that's kind of speaks to the industrial location of the railroad and a lot of the previous activity along the river. And then on top of that sits a glue laminated deck, which is a warmer, more sustainable material that kind of ties in with the rest of the trail. And then that same concept continues along the two shorter spans as we reach the ground before the DEP chamber and the area that passes to the rest of the trail. So through the center of the bridge, this is kind of a section through the slimmest point that's kind of showing an overlay of the two ways that this bridge acts. One is as a pedestrian walkway, and also as a tie to bring vehicles across to access the DEP facility. So you can see here a maintenance vehicle and as well as some emergency vehicles. So you have this underslung steel structure, as I mentioned, with a cantilevered glue lam deck, and then these thin stanchions that create the enclosure. Here's another image. Again, here you can see a really great view looking back towards the Highway 90 and the overlook moment where there's a glue laminated timber member that kind of rises out of the deck and acts as a bench for people who want to enjoy the views of the river. And on the other side, there's clearance for vehicles that may be passing through or for people to continue to move past.
Thanks. Yeah, so it's eventually the bridge will link to the shoreline trail moving further south. This is sort of the base of Breakneck where it connects to on the other side. So the long-term goal is that this is a sort of special moment as you land on the other side of the bridge and then continue on towards Cold Spring. So I think the last piece to talk about is the upper overlook, which is what we're calling the sort of first promontory of Breakneck Ridge. So it's currently the trail stewards are situated on the shoulder of 9D and have to contend with the traffic noise and manage a group of people all kind of huddled up along the shoulder of the roadway without very good protection. So the idea here is to move the stewards up onto the first promontory of Breakneck and provide, or really formalize, a little loop trail that acts as a sort of miniature Breakneck experience for people who just want to get the view or who are otherwise sort of unwilling or unable to continue on up the hike. So these paths that you're seeing are really just a formalization of existing desire lines. We don't want to add a lot of impact onto the site, but formalizing them with natural materials and engaging a local trail builder to do this sensitively, since it is such a special spot, and just make it a little clearer how people are supposed to move, provide that miniature experience, and really give the stewards an opportunity to control access to the site in a way that's comfortable for them and sort of cuts off people bypassing them, and also gives them a chance to really filter out and educate the public who are coming to hike Breakneck. And I think one part of that is providing a glimpse of a partially constructed, partially natural scramble that mimics the difficult conditions that will be found further up the trail. And the idea here is really to reduce the number of unfit people who are, show up in sandals or otherwise not quite up to the task of hiking Breakneck, so that the trail stewards and the EMS responders will have an easier job and the whole landscape will be a bit safer and less congested. So with that, Lisa Gregoransky can walk you through the trail steward in more detail.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, this is a view of that scramble that Scott's talking about. And I'm one of the people who's done the Breakneck hike one time. I can't even imagine the people who have done it more times than they can count, because it's really hard. It's really beautiful, but it's hard. And so when we were talking to the trail stewards about what they needed for this little tiny building, we could go on, as Scott said, functional considerations. We could actually move to the next slide if we can. Yeah, functional considerations are pretty simple. Need a place to store things, so we've sort of got about a 12-foot by 12-foot closet where the stewards can store items that they need. Need a place to hand out maps to the public or discuss the trail system with the public, so a kind of a covered space there. But they also asked that there be some way that they could kind of point out to the visiting public that scramble that Scott was just talking about, and make sure that the visitors do understand sort of what they're taking on when they head up Breakneck. So that was a really careful and conscious part of the siting of this little building. And so you see that it's just a little simple overhanging canopy with a grass roof. And roundwood columns. You can see an example in the little circle on the top there. And we're wanting to bear directly onto that beautiful ledge that's there, which we've begun to survey. And we're also conscious, as we are with the comfort stations, but even more so here, that this is a hard place to get to. It's a very constrained location for building. And so this is a prefabricated set of elements that can be, if they need to be carried up that trail, or perhaps driven in a small lull. And we could go on. So here you start to see some of the more architectural realizations of this building, which we hope has a kind of naturalistic quality while providing those functions that are needed. So I think I'll hand it back to Amy. at this point.
Great. So when we put all of this together, this is the site plan for the improvements planned at Breakneck. So you see the main trail going through, the trail banks, improved parking areas, improved train platforms, a fenced off railroad right of way, a new bridge, and a new lookout area for enjoying the view, and as well as a much more pleasant, we hope, place for the stewards to sit while they greet and filter the visitors to Breakneck to make sure those hiking are capable of hiking, and not calling for a rescue. So it is worth noting that even as visitation has gone up, the steward program has really been great in making sure that every year those rescue calls have gone down since that program has started. And so we really want to make sure that continues in the future as this park is built out, so we can keep having an orientation and function. Along those lines, we are going to head into the question and answer portion. People have been typing in some questions. It's at the bottom of your screen, a little Q&A box, and you can just type in your questions there. Some have been answered by typing in answers, and we'll answer some live now. And one we have from Nadine, and it's a longer question, Nadine, so I'll summarize, but it's really about how are we educating the visitor. So the stewards have been a great source of education currently on the trail. How are we educating visitors? Nadine would like to know that the highway is not just a parking lot. And so better behavior of people when they're getting in and out of their car, especially with dogs or hiking or walking side by side instead of single file as they're walking through. And then maybe sometimes wearing all black and coming out of the hike in the dark and being visually not there for passersby on the roadway, which is currently 55 miles an hour. I'd say we could tackle that a few ways. You suggest, could we give out armbands as reflectors? We could consider that. I believe the package of improvements that are planned will deal with some of those variables you mentioned. So reducing the speed limit, having a designated place for people to walk safely so they aren't walking in the roadway. I do know that people are impatient and they just take a rule of the land and walk in the roadway. I've seen it happen myself. But the parking behavior will be controlled, and we hope that the walking behavior will be controlled as well. I'll say that right now there's very little staff capacity within state parks to have somebody there all the time to scold any errant walkers, but we will have a stronger staff presence between stewards and actual staff in the future. So we really hope that the physical improvements plus sort of behavior prompts from the staff can collectively change that over time. It may take time, or maybe this will be so legible once it's constructed that those behaviors will correct themselves a bit. Another question came in about what are the construction era impacts to the trailhead, and we didn't cover that, so I wanted to make sure we talked about that as a group here. But when this is under construction, the Breakneck Trail will be closed, the trailhead itself, and the train service, but so that we can safely construct in this area. But that doesn't mean you can't still hike Breakneck via either, well, the Washburn or brook trails. So other trails will be able to provide the ascent. It won't be the rugged ascent that gets all the attention, but it will still be a climbable mountain. So this area will be closed, and Wilkinson will be closed. Scott, Dawn would like to know how many parking spaces in the Breakneck Trail area total?
Currently, there's about 150. What's planned for and formalized safer parking is 105.
And a related question from Phil is sort of just about that behavior of parallel parking versus nose in and backing into 90.
Yeah. So really trying to avoid anybody backing onto the state highway. The parallel parking lanes are 10 feet wide, so there's room to pull into the curb there and maneuver in and out without having to back into the traffic lane.
Dave would like to know, and I think Christina could speak to this, what the south end of the bridge looks like when it lands, knowing that in the future we'll continue from there, but what will this phase, how will that end in this phase?
Yeah, so for this phase, the south end of the bridge is really directed towards the overlook, and really that being the key piece of what you'd be visiting on the south side of the bridge. But as you approach the ground, there'd be a turnaround point for future connection past the DEP chamber. Really just focusing, like I said, on the overlook and the bridge as an alternate means of experiencing the views across the river.
That one. Fran has a question on amenities. Can you include a few wooden benches for folks whose chickases are too old to be comfortable on boulders? I think we can consider that, yes. So we haven't really gotten to the point of detail on the site planning for all of the where every waste bin and bench will go. But we'll keep this in mind, Fran, as we go forward. So there are a number of questions on parking. I believe we've answered. One is about charging for parking to sustain the upkeep of the park, and that is our goal. Is that as we improve these, we put in a charge feature, a gate where possible, so that these, like in Minnewaska, you're paying a day park fee, and that'll just really be a great revenue source for making sure we can do maintenance to the level that we really would like to see happen in this landscape, to make sure everything's running well, and we're handling the visitation. Will the steward station be heated and cooled for the stewards? I'll let Lisa answer that one.
The steward station is not heated and cooled for the stewards. It does have a great view, but no, it's a very simple little structure. It's got, I saw some questions in the chat too about solar panels. Both the little buildings will be fitted with solar panels to power them. So it will have that, so that the stewards can kind of plug in charge a phone, and we have one light inside the closet. But no, it's a very, very simple little structure, and the stewards won't be inside of it. They'll be sort of out under the canopy. And then also making their way to talk with the public around that whole network at the upper overlook that Scott was talking about, that set of trails or paths, where we understand various groups will gather and talk to different stewards.
Another parking question coming in. With no additional parking being made available, actually less, for all the additional people this trail will attract, won't cars clog up parking in Cold Spring and Beacon? The long-term strategy for providing additional parking supply, understanding there's very little space to add new parking in this area, right? In both communities and along this corridor, would be to have some remote lots that can be served by a trolley. So we're looking to provide some larger lots with completely off-street parking elsewhere, and then connect them with regular service with a trolley. So Scott pointed to the spot in this parking lot where the trolley would pick up and drop people off. that would be a really low fee ride for the day for just a couple of dollars. So if someone wants to go from a destination in one part of the park or from a train station and can bounce around within the system, and we really hope that will make parking, leaving your car for the day and having a legible experience, easy to get around, not a long wait times, will make it something people use. And you see this work in other national parks and high volume parks. Are you considering people making reservations to hike Breakneck as you are decreasing the direct parking? No, it has been brought up as a means of reducing impacts on the mountain itself. We'll be making a number of improvements to the trail conditions on Breakneck to address sort of where it is today because of the high visitation. And that will include hardening that start of the trail itself with a staircase and other restoration we hope to do in the future with state parks or supporting state parks in their aspirations to do that. In the past, they have had some trouble having restorations that stick from social trails because they just get reopened if there's not enough time for the vegetation to establish. And so we'll be working with state parks in the next year, starting in October, to add a trail in the worst kind of trail spreading area on Breakneck, which is at the flagpole spot where folks have gotten to that point and decide they may have bitten off more than they can chew and try to find a way down. And we understand that's both where a lot of habitat destruction occurs and a lot of lost hikers generate. Evan, the park manager, told me an interesting fun fact in the field the other day that they've not had to do a rescue from somebody who stayed on the trail. All of the rescues that they've performed have been people who've gotten off the trail trying to find their way down. And so by providing a shorter route, we really hope will reduce the number of rescue calls even further than the trail stewards have done to date. What is the plan for managing the increase in visitors not overwhelming, so as to not overwhelm Cold Spring? Nancy, I think what you'll see in the large piece of this is that we'll be creating a way for people to funnel quickly out of the village when they arrive to safely get to their destination. I know I've heard a lot of problems from people throwing garbage around, asking for directions. We'll be adding wayfinding signage. We'll have well-maintained garbage receptacles. So some of those just negative externalities of that visitation, hopefully we'll deal with. And ultimately, once the trail connection is made through to Cold Spring, we hope that will really allow people to come and go in a much more geographically constrained area if that's their choice. If they want to go and spend some dollars on Main Street, and that's very welcomed by businesses and restaurants there. But we do want to have it much more organized so it's not impacting in the same way that I know it does today. And we also hope that by providing destinations north and parking supply north and the trolley to get from point A to point B, someone could get on the trolley at the train station and never be walking around at all. And so when all of these things start working together in the next couple of years, we really hope to see all of that improve. I can't say it'll be immediate overnight, but I think over time, as we're able to make this whole vision built out, we'll see that managed in a much better manner. Okay, well, we have gone over time. I got chatting, sorry. But please stay in the know on our project. And we have a new website launching this fall, which will have much more information than our temporary website right now. Same address, but a whole new look and much more content. And then please sign up for our regular email blasts. They're informative. We'll certainly let you know major project updates and other opportunities to learn more, like this evening's webinar. So thank you for joining us. And it was a great turnout, over about 130 people. And this will be recorded. So if you know someone who is interested in seeing this but just couldn't do it at this day and time, please let them know. The recording will be up and it's viewable anytime. And thanks to my presenters.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Amy, thank you.